Hey there, welcome back to Coding at Home with the Code Hub. We are going to wind up working on our app again today. That wasn't the plan originally, but you know what? We're having so much fun with this app and there's so much that I want to explore that we can't stop. We got to keep going. So we're going to work on a game counter today. So in games, usually you have some kind of score and some kind of actions that get you more points. That's what we're going to work on today. Just the number of times you hit that L button. Now, I still haven't hooked up a right button, up, down. Hopefully you have. Hopefully you've taken it that extra step. Maybe we'll do that today. But the main goal will be to just count how many times we've actually been able to hit that L button. And that'll be our game score. We'll have a little label on the screen that shows you the score, because there's no use keeping score if you don't then display it somewhere so the player can actually see how they're doing. And then we'll explore a couple other things. We'll have a quick look at arrays and how we might use them to keep track of things in the game. And yeah, it should be a lot of fun. Quick reminder, we have our look back session tomorrow. It's a beginner session, so we're going to look at Hello Byte a little bit. We're going to look at the Code Machine Playground, probably a little bit early, just to get used to programming and coding concepts and to play around in a little bit more intimate setting than just me talking to you over Twitch or YouTube Live or Facebook Live or wherever you're watching this. So it's worth signing up. Go to that URL and drop us a line, and we'll get you set up. If that time doesn't work for you, drop us a note at live@thecodehub.ie, and maybe we can try to figure something out. Figure out a better time that works for more people. All right, with that, let's get over to the iPad, and we'll start doing some coding. All right, so we've got our app up. Let's start up Swift Playgrounds. You can see I'm in my Coding at Home aquarium already. If I hit run my code, we'll see where we're at. I've got my whale and my fish. My L button's all hooked up. I got my game over label that we added yesterday showing up. And let's see. So what are we going to add today? So remember, we left some comments yesterday, because sometimes you'll come back to your code and you'll say, I can't remember for the life of me where I was or what I was thinking. So if we kind of scroll down through our code, we see the note about the game over label. So we have a function there to show the game over label. We have our move left. Okay, and then we have a comment here saying add a counter. Also add an array for other fish. That might be interesting. Check for collisions. That's where we show our game over. We rotate the fish and show the game over label. We have a press whale. So if we press on the whale, we scale up. We wired up our buttons. Okay, so the main thing we want to work on first is keep track of how many times we're able to move. So what I would do for that is, I know that I need some kind of variable, and it's a variable because it's going to change. It's going to be a number, and a whole number at that, so it's going to be an int. We're going to give it a useful name like step counter, maybe. So let's add this up here, and it's not quite a component, and it's not quite a space. Let's add a new section here. We're going to add a comment that says, we're just going to call it, we'll call it variables. We could have called it properties, this section, or whatever we want, but it's just to let me know that, okay, cool, this is where I would keep all of my state for the game. And the state for a game is, you use it a lot. In fact, we saw down in the guts of our Swift Playground yesterday, we imported GameKit from Apple. That has a few interesting classes for managing the state of your game. So if you think about when you're playing a game like Fortnite or Angry Birds or whatever, the state of the game just refers to all the different pieces that you have in flight. So For something like Fortnite, maybe what weapon you're carrying or where you are on the map. That's some of the game state. What avatar or what skin you're wearing, what dances you have enabled. Same thing with Angry Birds. What level you're on could be one of them. How many goes you've already had to try to get the pigs. All of those things are the game state. So in this case, I've got a weird game here because we haven't really fleshed out the idea fully, but it's kind of an app. It's an aquarium. So some of my game state is going to be maybe I'll need an array for the fish that I have in my aquarium. But now what we want to do is we want to start capturing the steps that I take with my main character fish. So I'm going to create a variable. I'll tap on the var autocomplete because then I get my name and value and the equal sign automatically written out for me. So we're going to call this step counter. You can see I used a lowercase for the first letter of my variable and then a capitalized letter for the next word, our camel case style, because that's what we do for properties just by convention. It makes it easier for me to read this code if it's a lowercase. I don't think that it might be a type or something. And we're going to start it with, well, when the game starts, it's going to be 0 because I haven't taken any steps yet. Okay, so I have my step counter. Now, the only place that I'm taking any steps right now is in the move left function. So let's see. So I only want to take a step maybe when I actually move, because I could add the counter here and say, okay, well, step counter. And this is a handy way to increment something. Increment just means to add to something. You can see in the autocomplete, I have a plus equals button. If I tap on plus equals and I do 1, what this does is it says, this is sort of the shorthand way for writing this. So I could write equals step counter plus 1. Remember, us programmers, we're kind of lazy at our heart. So we like to do things as quickly as possible, as short as possible. So instead of this, writing all this out and writing step counter out twice, if I do plus equals, it will basically take my step counter, the value of my step counter, which is 0 the first time it gets called, and then add 1 to it, and then assign that value, so 1, to the step counter variable. So the next time I come through, it'll look at the value of step counter. It'll say, okay, cool, the value is 1. Let's add 1 to it, so it's 2, and then assign that to step counter. So I could add this to my move left up here, but maybe that's not the best place for it. Maybe I want to only increment the step counter when I actually move. So let's do this. Let's add it down here instead. We're going to delete that other one. It's called step counter, not strep counter. So we'll do plus equals 1. I'll go delete that other one. And I could take my comment down and add it to that other section. But what I'll do is I'll just remove that comment for now, because I actually added the counter up above. Okay. So now I have this step counter. So every time I hit that move left and I'm able to move left, it'll add 1 to that number of steps that I've taken. Okay. So that's cool, but now I need this this isn't very exciting if I'm not displaying it on the screen, because if I run my code now and I hit the L button, I'm incrementing the step counter, but it's not very exciting, is it? So let's see. We're going to create a new function where we increment the step counter. And in this function, we'll also gonna update a label on the screen. So let's do this. Let's create a function. So let's tap on the func keyword. We're gonna say update step counter. That way it's named very clearly and it's even spelled right. Update step counter. So we know exactly what this function is doing. And in here, we're going to go, let me go grab this code. We're going to select this text so I can select the whole thing. I'm going to cut it. And then I'm going to paste it in here. This goes back to that refactoring that we were doing yesterday. We did a bit of moving code and we added some functions. Refactoring is kind of an ongoing process. As you go back to the code again and again, you say, oh, well, all right, how could I change this? How could I make it a little bit better? All right, so we incremented the step counter. Now we're going to update the label, but we don't have a label yet. So let's go up to our components section, way up at the top, and create a new component for our score. So we'll call it step label. And we're going to create it as a label. And we'll use the parentheses here. Perfect. All right. Now, we have our step label defined. It's nice because we have our step counter defined there. Now we're going to style our components a little bit. After we set the left button title, we'll set up our step counter label. So step label dot, and we can see some of the properties on our labels that we saw yesterday with our game over label. I'm going to set the text for it. And let's see. So we'll often see things like score, colon, and then the number of your score. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick the string literal autocomplete option. We're going to say, bring up the keyboard. We're going to say steps. And now this is kind of a neat trick with Swift and strings. We're going to grab this thing here, the backslash over n. And then just following that, we're going to go grab some parentheses. So grab the open one. So I touched on the J and dragged down to the right. And I'm going to type in, remember our variable is called step counter. And then I'm going to close that by touching on the J and dragging down to the left to get my closing parentheses. And you can see that it changed. So all of our other strings are all red. So starting with those double quotes, Swift says, hey, just to help you out, I'm going to highlight that as a red piece of text so you know that it's a string. It's very easy for us to read down and scan through this whole file and say, oh yeah, cool, the yellow ones are numbers, blue ones are variables. Okay, we don't have a blue one here. Something happened there. We can see green for comments. We can see blue for our function names and pink for some of our keywords. That's kind of handy. It lets us scan the text really easily. Now, with this, when we added this thing here, this funky backslash and a parentheses with the name of a variable and then closing parentheses, Swift is able to say that, oh, hey, I'm going to take the value of this variable and display it here inside my string. So when I go to render this string, Swift says, all right, cool. So I'm going to first display these characters, STEPS, colon, space, and then it's going to go looking for the value of this variable, write that in there, and then end the string. So let's see what that looks like. Let's place it in let's add our score label to our space, and we'll see it in action. Space dot add. We're going to add it at a certain point. So we're going to add our step label at point. Well, I like the idea that it'll be kind of up here. So we'll get an X and Y position. We're going to set it back there. So that's back here is minus on the X axis. So let's say minus 300 is where we'll start it. And the Y will be, well, this is positive. So let's put it at 300 positive. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, cool. There's my little steps counter. Okay, it's not changing though. Why isn't it changing? Well, what happened was when Swift was reading through this, it said, okay, I'm going to set the label, the text to this string. And when it set it to this string, it went and evaluated that step counter at that time when it was setting it up. And at that time, step counter was 0. So it was like, okay, I'll draw a 0 in there. We're not telling it to update after we update that step counter. So now we have to set that text again after we update step counter. So if we go down here, down to our update step counter, now we can update the UI. And UI just stands for user interface. So it's everything you see is the UI. Like we designed our camera UI in the Assemble Your Camera playground and the Lights Camera Code playgrounds. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to get the step label. We're going to set the text to, let's see, where's my, there we go, autocomplete. We're going to say steps. We'll do the same thing. We'll go grab the backslash. We'll grab the open parentheses. We'll type in step counter. And then we'll close the parentheses. Because right now, we haven't completed those parentheses hugging that variable. So Swift is looking at it going, yep, I don't know what that is. If I tap on this, it'll say unterminated string literal. Okay, because I've got this escaping character here. That's what that backslash does, is it says, hey, Swift, just, you've got to treat this one special. Okay, cool. Now I've got my closing parentheses, so everything's fine. That my error went away. Let's try running our code. Oh, it's still not updating. Okay, all right. There's something else. We gotta tweak this. We gotta try to fix this because the step counter should have updated, right? Because we have a plus equals 1. So maybe to get it to draw again, what we need to do is add it back to the space again. So let's go do that. So we'll go do space. We'll bring it up and we'll start typing space. So space dot add. We're going to add our step label again. Add a certain point. We'll try to use the same, right? We use what, minus 300 and then positive 300 for the Y. Now let's try running it. Oh, we're still not getting it. All right, let's see. We got to try to figure out what's going on here then. So we've got our step label. We've got our step counter. We'll scroll back down to our update step counter. So we do step counter plus equals 1. We add our steps label here. Then we add our step label again. We'll actually try testing this out. So if you ever want to debug something, you could do something like this. And we'll close our string. So I'm going to add, so now I'll see a TTT at the end if this code actually gets run. So let's run our code. So I hit L. Oh, so you know what? That doesn't look like it's being run, does it? Well, if we look, we're not actually calling update that update method, are we? Oh, all right, that's cool. So let's go back and fix it. This is sometimes you'll go down this path and you'll say, I added all this code, I've done all this stuff. I even tried this sort of brute force method of re-adding it back to the space. That doesn't feel right, but maybe let's try it out. When I'm not calling my method. So let's try calling that method. Let's see. It was called update step counter. Because now we've actually moved the fish. All right, so now let's try running it. If we hit L, okay, all right, well, it updated. Let's try taking out that kind of silly TTT. Now let's try running it. Okay, that looks cool. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, great. We can get a pretty good score going even after we ended the game. Now while we're debugging, we debug the problem. We understand, okay, now I know what's going on. Let's try taking this out too. One thing that's important to remember is after you go debugging, if you write a bunch of extra code, is try taking out some of that code. Don't forget and just leave it in. You want to go back and remove that stuff. So let's hit it. There we go. So great. We don't need to do that extra step of re-adding the text label back to the space. We only have to change the label, the text on our step label. And we have our score counter. Okay, now we're feeling a bit more like a real game or even a workout app if we're tracking steps. All right, what's the one last thing that we could do here? Well, the one last thing, we could do lots of different things. The last thing that we're going to do, though, today is we're going to create, because I do want to make this into an aquarium. I don't want to necessarily make it a game. We might take out our check for contact and end the game. So what I'll do is I'll comment that out for now. And actually, I'll comment out the fish rotation because I don't want the fish to rotate. And we can even actually, do you know what? Well, we won't take it out because what I'll do is I'll post this code for you guys if you want to play around with it yourself. So I'll leave that in there, and I'll leave a couple different versions of this in there. So we'll leave that in there for now. Okay, so, and we scale the fish up. That's fine. Maybe scale it a little bit smaller so we don't crowd the other fish. Let's add some more fish to this aquarium because it's looking very bare. We've only got the whale and our other fish, so not super exciting. So we're going to create another variable. Well, they're components, so let's create them in the components area. And we're going to make it a variable so we can add things to this array. Remember, we worked with arrays back in Everyone Can Code Puzzles. So we'll call this one fishes. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it an array of fish. And we'll start out with it empty. Now remember, we can't have just an empty array with nothing in it. We have to tell Swift what we plan to put in it. Well, since we're using buttons for fish, let's do that. So remember to tell fish what type, well, to tell Swift what type of array this fishes array is going to be. We use a colon. And then we say, okay, cool, it's going to be an array. So we give it the symbol for array. And inside here, we have to tell it what type we're going to store in there. So let's say button. Now, another refactoring thing we might want to do, and I know some of you have started doing this already, is you might want to go and create a new class called fish or spaceship or whatever your sort of main character is. And it can just be a subclass of a button if that's what we're using at first. The reason why you do something like that is that you could then go put it in another file. That would be kind of handy because then the code lives there and not just in this one playground page. But then it also protects you from down the line. If you decide to say, actually, do you know what? I don't want the fish to be a button anymore. I don't want people to be able to press on them. I want it to just be an image view. You could then say, okay, fish is no longer a subclass of a button. It's a subclass of an image view. And hopefully your other code that uses that fish class, then they don't have to know about it. If they haven't connected it the way you would connect a button, then it doesn't have to know that you've changed the guts of your fish under the hood. All right, so who thought you'd be talking about fish guts while programming, huh? All right, so we have our fishes array and a button. So what we're going to do is when we move left, we'll add some friends for this fish. Or actually, you know what? That's kind of weird. That doesn't make any sense. Let's make a new button, under left button, where we can populate this aquarium. So we'll call it add fish. This will be the name of this button. So we'll get a button type. Just like our left button. Okay, what do we need to do to configure that thing? Let's see, left button, we set a border color and a border width. I kind of like that style. Let's do that same thing here. So let's get our add fish button. We're going to set we'll just set a background color. And we'll set it equal to, let's make it yellow. And then we're going to add it to the space. And I'll put it right here next to my left button so that it's added in the same relative space. So space.add. And we'll give it a size too. So we'll say add fish. We're going to add it at point, well, let's see, the left button is at 300 and 300. Let's maybe add it just above there. So we'll add it at 300x is good. And then y will be above that, so maybe let's do that at 400. And we'll add a size. And that L button has been working well for us. So let's add a size with a width and a height. And we'll make it 50 by 50. Okay, so what we've done is we have our add fish button. We set a background color. That's all we did. We didn't even set a quarter radius, so it'll be a square button. We added it to the space at point 300 on the x-axis, 400 on the y-axis. The size is going to be 50-50, so it's going to be the same size as our left button. Let's try running that. Okay, cool. There's my add fish button. Now, what's the one thing we need to do to get that to work for us? Well, we need to wire it up. So we're going to go way down to the bottom where we wire up the buttons. Maybe we'll change some of this and we'll say wire up the buttons. So our comment makes a little more sense. So when our add fish button is pressed, we want to connect it to a certain function. So we'll connect it to what? Well, let's create I tapped add fish there, but we need to add a function called add fish that takes a pulse as a parameter, because that's the signature of the function that a pressed button can connect to. Right? If we go back up and we looked at the press whale button, let's go back up there. Way back up. Where is the press whale button? I shot right by it, didn't I? Check for contact. Show game over. Update step counter. Move left. Press whale. Okay, there's my press whale. Now I want to add fish here. So let's write a function that looks similar to press whale, but it's called add fish. So let's tap on the func keyword. I'll bring that down so we can see what we're doing. So we're going to call it add fish. We need to add a pulse parameter. So if you remember how to do that, we tap on the braces here or here. And we tap on add parameter. And we're going to call it pulse. And it's going to be of type pulse. Okay. Now in the body, this is where we're going to add our fish, and we'll add them to the array. So we'll say let fish equal, well, it's going to be a button because we've said that it has to be a button for that array. Since we're just defining this component here, we're going to immediately add the image. So the image will be equal to, let's go find a fish one. I think we're running out of fish to add. There's that one. I don't think I have another fish in here, actually. Is that a duck? Okay, cool. So we're going to add the fish, and then we'll do our space. We'll space add. Let's add it at a point. We'll add our fish, and we'll create a point. We'll do an X and Y. Now remember we did our int.random the other day, right? So when we wanted to add the treasure, we have an add treasure method here, way up at the top, right, where we found a position, our random X position and our random Y position. We actually used a double. So let's do that again. Let's create a double.random in that same range. Actually, tell you what, let's just copy that. And go back down all the way to the bottom to our new add fish. So we're going to create a variable to hold this thing. And we're going to call it a double. Actually, never mind. You can copy and paste it. I'll type the whole thing out. Dot random. It gives us an autocomplete option. So we'll pick random in the range. So we'll do minus. Let's do the whole thing. Minus 500. Dot, dot, dot. Tells me that it's a range from 500 to 500. And then I'm going to do random Y the same way. Random Y equals double dot random minus 500 dot 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 to 500. So now for X and Y, we can just use those new variables that we created called random X and random Y. Now it said it was looking for an int. We've passed it a double, which is a different type, but that's okay because there was also a point initializer where we could pass in a double for X and Y. All right, so let's run our code and just quickly see how this works. Let's tap that yellow button. Oh, there's our duck. Let's make our screen a bit bigger. Okay, cool. All right, we've got ducks appearing everywhere, all around. Now, this isn't great though, because the whole point of this was to show you that we were adding these to an array. I haven't added them to any array. The last thing I'm going to do today, and maybe we'll pick this up again on Monday. It's way too much fun playing with this playground, and we'll spend more time on it. We'll go through this again on Monday. But the last thing I would do is, now that I've created that fish, I've added to the space, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this to my fishes array. So how I would do that would be, I'm going to just start typing in fishes. You can see there it is. So I'm going to type fishes. Now it's an empty array, so there's nothing in it. So I'm going to actually go and append. I'm going to use this append method. And I'm going to add my fish. So now my fishes array is going to start to have more fish on the screen. So what we're going to do is, in our aquarium, we're going to have our step counter for our main fish. We'll have another counter that shows us how many fish are in our array. And then maybe what we'll do is we'll have a little collision counter to see how many times we run into other fish. That's what we're going to do for Monday. If you want to try working on that over the weekend, I would love to see it. Feel free to email your playground to live@thecodehub.ie. That would be amazing. Otherwise, drop us a note in the discussions board. The link appears in the description for this video. Yeah, get a hold of us somehow, and we'd love to see your code. All right, I hope you had fun today. This was a lot of stuff today. And we went kind of fast towards the end. We got our step label up and running. And we started to talk about our array. We could definitely do with cleaning up this code and adding it to different files so it's a little bit more organized. But we're on our way to a fairly interesting little aquarium. And way easier to take care of than a real aquarium. All right, if you're joining us for the look back session, we'll see you tomorrow. If not, we'll see you again on Monday. All right, bye.